Hey, good evening. It's 6 o'clock. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. This is a regular meeting of Manitou Springs City Council, May 2nd, 2023. And we'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Would the city clerk please call the roll?
City council members, Judith Chandler,
Present.
John Shada, Julie Wolf,
Here.
Natalie Johnson,
Here.
Michelle Weatherholt,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Nancy Fortune,
Present.
Mayor John Graham.
Present. Thank you. Okay, council, next item is approval of the agenda. You've all had a chance to review the agenda. Would seek a motion to approve.
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mayor Pro Tem, and was there a second? Natalie second, okay. Okay. Okay, all in favor? We'll vote here.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great, thank you. All right, next item would be public comment on non-agenda items. So this would be the time during the meeting. If there's anyone in the public who'd like to speak to anything that's not on the agenda, this would be the time to do it. Judy, did we receive any emails or anything? I guess not. Okay, we'll move along then. Thank you. Next item is the consent calendar. We have two items on it. First is approval of the April 18th, 2023 regular meeting minutes. Second is approval of the agreement for general services with Trax Construction for the 2023 street maintenance program. If there's any objections, we can pull an item off. If not, I would seek a motion to accept and approve.
I'll move to approve the consent calendar, item F1 and F2.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded, okay. Tie between Councillor Wolf and Mayor Pro Tem Fortune, okay. A tie, okay, so let's go ahead and vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Great, thank you. The consent calendar is approved. Next, first item of business is approval of Anthony Lane as a regular member of the Parks and Recreation Board. Mr. Lane is here. Mr. Lane, if you'd like to take the mic and tell us a little bit about yourself and your interest in joining the Park and Rec Board, I think that'd be nice. There's a button there in the middle that'll turn the light on when it's green. You can speak. You'd start off with your name and address, please. And it's good to have the microphone about 3 inches from your mouth.
All right. Well, thank you. Am I too close? Thank you for having me here this evening. So Anthony Lane, we live at 124 Fairview Avenue. And we just moved back to Colorado this past summer in August. And just thrilled to be in Manitou Springs. We lived in this area before, in the Colorado Springs area for about 5 years, and moved away for a while. We were on the East Coast. And just came back, and you know, and Manitou is really the place we've been thinking about for a long time, where we wanted to be. We used to spend a lot of time here when we lived in Colorado Springs before. We just love, you know, love the trails and the amenities and the events and everything. And you know, since we left, you know, so much great stuff has happened. And this is you know, actually getting moved into our house here. I joked with my wife that after getting down our driveway, you know, we were never going to leave. The movers weren't too happy with us. Yeah, we just, you know, looking for ways to get involved, and really excited about the Parks and Recreation Board, and you know, contributing in whatever way I can.
Great, thank you. Council, questions or comments for Anthony? Mayor Pro Tem?
Yeah, thanks for applying. I'm just curious, how did you find out, and what, who talked with you, and who kind of encouraged you to join Parab, or was it strictly your interest that took you to it?
You know, Tim Bresnahan's a friend of ours, so we've known them for years. I met Danu at another event, and you know, and just, I mean, that's another great reason to join, is just to connect with, you know, it seems like a great group. And I've had a chance to be at 2 of the recent meetings.
Great answer. When you said Tim, I understood completely. So thank you.
Other counselors? If not, I would look for a motion to approve Anthony Lane as a regular member of the Manitou Springs Parks and Recreation Board. Okay, we have a motion by Counselor Wolf,
Second.
seconded by Counselor Chandler. Let's go ahead and vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Great, you're approved. Thank you very much, Anthony. We appreciate you stepping up and volunteering.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Okay, next item is Resolution 1123, a resolution opposing Colorado Senate Bill 213 regarding state land use control. And there's a draft resolution in the council packet. This has been kind of a ping pong ball. It's been going back and forth in the State House. As of I guess it was this morning about 10 o'clock, the Colorado Municipal League sent an email out. And they said they are continuing to oppose this. You can read a little bit of the email. It said last night, CML learned that the House sponsors, with the full support and assistance from Governor Polis's office, will seek to add 7 amendments to Senate Bill SB 23-313. The amendments will almost completely put back all the unconstitutional preemptions taken out in the Senate and retain most of the 17 Senate amendments added on to the second reading. So Council, I guess I'd like to take the temperature of the room here. I think it's important to oppose this on I guess, a philosophical basis. We're in the kind of the end stage of the legislative session, but we could certainly add our voices as of tomorrow to what's going on. The Pikes Peak Area Council of Governments met yesterday to discuss State House action, and this was probably the object that got the most consideration, most discussion, and it remains PPACG is steadfastly opposing this. As of yesterday, my understanding was CML was saying oppose unless amended, and then this morning that changed to just opposed. So Council, do we have a sentiment here as to what you'd like to do? Council, Julie?
Thank you. I'm not familiar with the latest stage of events. Can you summarize for us what the current bill says so we know what we're agreeing or disagreeing with?
Well, I'll do it to the best of my ability, but this has gone back and forth quite a bit. So I think it's back more in its original state. So with that qualification, I would say, it's some of the objections that I feel personally, and these have been voiced by other elected officials, members of PPACG as well as CML. This basically would give the state a lot of land use powers. It would take many of the provisions that we put into embedded in our land use development code that we approved in January, and it would invalidate a lot of that. It would take a lot of local control away. For instance, it would allow anybody to build an ADU pretty much anywhere. Now, one of the qualifications is that this in El Paso County, this would only apply to Colorado Springs, Monument, and Fountain. So we're not under the gun right now. But it seems philosophically that the state legislature is thinking that they have a better sense of control of what should be done in our communities rather than we do. It would also take DOLA and make it less of a, I guess, kind of its role as being sort of a helpful and supportive organization. It would turn into a regulatory agency more so. So they would be checking to make sure that we're letting people build wherever they want, do whatever. And much of this is without regard to the existing infrastructure, the capacity of of neighborhoods to support a quality of life. It disregards a lot of parking provisions. I think ostensibly what it tries to do is to make housing affordable in Colorado. It tries to address the need for housing, which is a worthwhile and noble thing, but it is mostly about letting, I guess, to be cynical about it, but probably somewhat more direct, it lets developers do what they want to do. Sure.
So the last thing I read, and it's perhaps no longer the case. I thought they had removed the height and other offensive sections of the bill, and the only thing they kept in was that any area that is zoned as allowing single-family homes only have to allow fourplexes, whereas before it was a sixplex. So is that, did they add those offensive things back again? Because then I read that CML was very encouraged. I'm just concerned about voting on something where I have no idea really where it stands. I mean, I agree with everything you said generally, but I don't know what it says today.
And to tell the truth, I don't either, to be exact. I know CML was, they were opposing it unless amended. And then amendments were put in and they seemed to be mellowing out. And it was, at one point, it was almost characterized as, do we want to monitor this? It tended to be more supportive. Sunday morning, CML sent out an email again saying that this doesn't look good. They changed some things around. I guess speaking as a layman, I would say they tried to pull a fast one, but that's probably normal practice in the state legislature as they negotiate and go back and forth. So, that's not as thorough as an answer as I like to give you, but it's, I know even the PPACG lobbyist who was following this very closely, yesterday morning, he said, there's been 50 pages of amendments here. He says, I can't really tell you what. He says, if you ask me a rational question, all I can honestly say is right now, I don't know, and I'll have to research it. So I guess I'm in a similar boat. Judith.
Yeah, I've been following this bill since Governor Paulus ran on this bill. He is highly supportive of it and believes that it will go a long way to address the housing shortage in Colorado. In its first iteration that went to the Senate committee, to State House, I believe there were 11 amendments that were deemed to be unconstitutional and removed. The ski towns were really opposed to this. It really increases density in cities. Now it's population based. So population cities of 5,000 or less than 5,000, excuse me, are exempted, but we're at 4,800 and some. So who knows if that would change. After it went to the Senate committee, the CML felt like they could support it only if the mandate was removed. So then it went to the next committee, the Housing Committee, and all of those amendments were put back in. It's really a developer's dream because it also states that like if you take our land use development code that we recently passed, a developer could come in and say, I'm going to put all sorts of affordable housing here, and I just really can't afford to do that and follow all of the pretty facades and amendments and landscaping that your code requires. So it would exempt. So there would be some exemptions for developers based on the amount of affordable housing. So there's some fear about that. So now it's sitting at CML is opposing it again. And I think that this bill is going to, I didn't think it was going to pass, and now I'm real worried about it. Governor Paulus has come out with another statement strongly supporting this bill and saying that basically he'll do everything in his power to get this over the finish line. So CML is reaching out to communities to just ask that we empower ourselves to call our legislatures. You can get on the CML website and oppose it yourself. I've done that already. I believe Michelle has. And then they're recommending that towns put out resolutions opposing it as well. So that's what I know to be true today. It'll probably change tomorrow.
So I just noticed here part of the email from CML this morning. Again, this was just after 10 o'clock. Said at this point, it is clear there is no interest by proponents and sponsors at compromise and partnership to accelerate ongoing municipal efforts to increase affordable housing. They would rather see this legislation put on a collision course with the courts where untold delays and waste of taxpayer resources will do anything but help to build more affordable housing. And I think that's an underlying theme that I've heard. I've been listening to this discussion for, I think, probably about 3 weeks now. It's been ongoing. So I will add that. Other comments? Okay, Nancy?
Yeah, just normally I would be supportive of this initiative, but I do think that it continues to be flawed. So I will vote for the resolution because I think we need to express our concerns. But it does concern me, as Julie said, that it's in such a state of flux at this point. It's hard to know where it's going or what's going to happen. But I think the resolution is generic enough to just express our overall concerns that I'm comfortable in voting for it.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to make a motion?
Sure. Excuse me. I would move to approve resolution number 1123, a resolution opposing Colorado Senate Bill 213 regarding state land use control.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you much. Okay. Item 3, resolution number 1023, a resolution adopting a public engagement plan for the city of Manitou Springs. And Alex, our PIO, briefed us on this a couple of weeks ago. Alex, you want to add anything new or refresh our memories?
Good evening, Mayor Graham, City Council. As just stated, I'm Alex Treffry. I'm the Public Information Officer for the city. Yes, I did present this a few weeks ago. There have been no changes since then. Just as a very brief refresher, this is really a plan to get the city to start planning for public engagement and thinking about the best practices and processes to use for public engagement before projects really are underway. And it just makes us more prepared to have effective public participation in Manitou Springs. But with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, council, any questions or comments for Alex? Nancy?
Yes. Excuse me. Thanks, Alex. One question, the resolution does not address or reference a specific plan other than a public engagement plan. So is the intent that the document that you submitted as an attachment is actually attached to that resolution as the plan?
That was my intent, correct?
Okay, and also, I didn't reread the whole thing thoroughly again, but I was wondering about amending the plan as we go along. And how would that be accomplished? Because I suspect that there may be a desire as we implement to amend it. So will it be easy enough? I mean, does it have to come to council to amend, or you as the community engagement guru for the city, will you be the one amending it? How will that work?
I would say that if we did want to amend the plan as we go, that's absolutely an option. I would think, though, that the plan is broad enough and based on best practices that the actual specifics of that plan wouldn't actually change in my mind. Mainly just because it really is these two books I have here boiled down into a plan. There's not really anything very specific that would need to be changed hastily for some reason. Granted, that doesn't mean that we couldn't take it back for resolution, but just as your previous question answered, if it is attached with that resolution, my thoughts are yes, I would have to take it back to council if I wanted to amend it.
Are you what's your first community engagement? Do you have a prospect of your first community engagement that you're gonna run through this framework?
I do have some ideas. We will be using this for the Ruxton Infrastructure Improvement Project. But with that said, since that project is underway, If this plan was implemented years ago, that this plan would have been filled out when we initially started, even the project and probably after we received funding. But that doesn't mean it can't be used for the construction aspect of it. But I want to be clear that I have to work with the staff that do community engagement that are part of these project teams. And I have to train them on how to properly do this. But the idea is to probably have the first plan filled out for that Ruxton project after I can work with that project team and train them how to use it. But it would mainly be in terms of construction engagement, not in terms of the design and going back to the functionality study, et cetera.
Yeah, please go ahead, Nancy.
And sorry, I said that was my last, but I do have one more. And that is you and I, after the last one we discussed, I brought up not using the term stakeholders and using interested participants or something instead. And are you going to change that language in the plan?
Yeah, if city council would like to, if they do want to approve this resolution, if they wanted to give direction to change the word stakeholder to interested and or affected parties, that is more than acceptable by me. I think that the word stakeholder sometimes has some negative connotations. A lot of the time it kind of, when we think of stakeholder in the literal term, it kind of has that funding aspect to it, which is not at all important with public engagement. So if that was a recommended change, I support that fully.
Thank you.
You're
So
welcome.
I would recommend that council that we ask Alex to change that terminology to interested in, what was it, affected participants?
Yes,
Thank you.
parties, sorry.
Let's keep that thought in mind when we get to a motion then. See, Judith, do you have a comment?
Thank you. So we will be following the International Association of Public Participation, the IAP2 framework, pretty straightforward. It does use the term stakeholder liberally throughout the entire document, including in a lot of the yes, thank you. So I don't know if we need to go through and scrub that or not, but my question to you is that you mentioned training, and it does say that the International Association of Public Participation offers training and certification. Is that something they provide if we're using their framework, or are you just using their framework and then you're going to create your own training for staff?
So they offer a variety of trainings. I've been to 2 of their trainings though. And so it's almost joint, but one of their trainings is planning for effective public participation. And then another one of their trainings is using techniques for public participation. I don't remember the exact phrasing, but I've been to each of those. They're about a week long, very intensive, but they were extremely useful. And it really does just kind of go over that framework with with people who created IAP2, and you kind of get to learn from them. So it was great. So I have done those courses. And so my idea is with staff is just to high level go over that and make them, and because I'll be there every step of the way with them if they need help with planning for public participation or anything like that. But my idea with the internal trainings for city staff are to really just go over a case study, show them how to use this plan, and then we can translate it to how that actually works for the city of Manitou Springs. Does that answer your question?
It does. And I have one more question, Mayor, if I may.
Yeah, please go ahead.
So when we use this in the community engagements going forward, is the plan to kind of do a postmortem after you use this framework for the engagement process, and then see what works and what didn't? Because I would love some of that feedback from you when we are actually putting it into real practice.
Yeah, the last page of the plan is very high level on kind of that evaluation process of public engagement, because that's a very important part of the plan. And it's really a requirement of the plan is to, and if I could even trail along more in the weeds, it's something that gets forgotten by public process practitioners a lot, is to look back at the process and see what worked, what didn't, because public engagement is never and will never be perfect. There's always different approaches that you could have, or different techniques that would have worked better, or different information you could have said in a different way, or et cetera, et cetera. So yes, evaluating the process and learning from it is the final step in this plan.
And if there's any significant feedback, you'll be giving that to council. And that, I mean, that we need, that you feel that we should know. I mean, you don't have to give us all the feedback, but I mean, if there's something significant that, you know, you found that that makes us take a look at either changing the framework or doing something different, I would love to be apprised. We'd love to be apprised of that.
Yes, the ideal would be is that if something's going to city council for approval that used public engagement, I think that, for instance, something that is a great example of that just happened was the final design, exterior design for the Carnegie Library. Let's say that this plan was in place for when that happened. This would be an attachment to that council packet, the plan with that evaluation process, so we can kind of see. But of course, as council members, it's extremely important that you also apply your own framework of how do you find public participation to be effective and things like that. And during the last council meeting, Nancy brought it up, but having training on how to approach that, or even an understanding of how as an elected official can I identify effective public participation is important too. And so I'm sure there's plenty of info on that. You're welcome.
Thank you.
Sorry, I
Nancy,
keep coming with
That's
questions.
okay.
If I understand the framework correctly, it would be council that would determine the level of engagement, correct?
No, the level of engagement is determined, if you don't mind me pausing for a quick second, I can find the page number. On page 28, step 2, select a level of engagement. Sorry, that's page 28 of the plan, not the packet. I don't have the whole packet in front of me. But there is that link at the top, the public participation expectations Excel file. And so essentially what that is a quantitative way to select a level of engagement. So it's certain questions that you ask yourself about internal expectations and public expectations, as well as other questions that are relevant to the level of engagement. And then from that level of engagement that you quantitatively come upon, that's where you select techniques. Does that make sense? I know that was a lot.
Yeah, I'm a little confused. I'm looking at page 10, 8, 9, and 10, where it talks about sustainable decisions.
Mhm.
And as I read that, it sounded like council would be the one that would determine if it's inform, consult, involve, collaborate, or empower.
So do you want me to talk about the sustainable decisions framework a little bit to maybe clear that up? Is that where?
Yeah.
Is council okay with that? Okay, let's hear it.
So as Councillor Fortune just noted, on page 8, you can see that graphic, that's sustainable decisions. And there's really 4 parts to that. And it's economically viable, technically feasible, environmentally compatible, and community benefit. And really what the sustainable decision framework would be something that's part of every public engagement plan, but also something that's talked about with the community. Thank you for bringing that up. That's talked about with the community about how elected officials make decisions. I think that whether you've seen this framework or not, as an elected official, you really do this almost, I want to say, subconsciously. You weigh the pros and cons, or you weigh the benefits of each of these to make a sustainable decision. So when we approach the public for community engagement, we want to make sure that it's clear that just because the community is leaning one way or one stakeholder is leaning one way, that doesn't mean that that's what city council follows. That is just the community input that they're going to weigh with their sustainable decision framework. So there's so many factors that you as a council member have to weigh that your average community member just doesn't understand because they don't do it every day like you all do. So this framework is meant to educate them on how does an elected official really make that decision, and where does your input fall in there? Does that clear something up?
Okay, let me be more specific. Who, and maybe you've answered this and I just don't understand. Who determines the level of engagement? How is that determined? Did you just answer that for me?
So that would be the project team who fills out this public engagement plan.
Okay. Because I once signed up years ago to agree to empower a group. And I will be very hard pressed to ever do that again.
Great point. I would say that the empower level of engagement, which is on page 10. I just want to make sure everyone can follow along with me. On page 10, the empower level of engagement, which is essentially placing the decision in the public's hands and saying, it is your decision now. That is a council decision, and that's a legal thing. City staff cannot say this is going to the ballot. That's only something city council can do. Well, in terms of, the city council making that decision. So for the empower level, that's not something that city staff can even do. So if city council so wish to empower the public to make a decision, that would absolutely have to be their decision. And there are very, very few times where that would be any recommendation. You're welcome.
Thank you. Other counselors? Okay, got a couple things here. Initially, Alex, I was a little skeptical. I was thinking this is pretty highfalutin for little old Manitou, and do we really need to make things more complicated? Because it seems like we let government become increasingly complicated. And I still have mixed emotions about making this a resolution. However, looking back, I think of a little over 3 years ago, when I took office along with a number of people here, one of the first things we dealt with was Crystal Park Road. And they had gone through 2 years of public engagement. People were dying of exhaustion from being engaged publicly. And it just went nowhere. It had no finite boundary. It went on forever and ever. And so it seems to me like if we establish a process here that the community can recognize, that would be helpful. In other examples, it was, kind of what Nancy said. I've heard other people say, I've been on committees and we lived to be on a committee. We didn't get anything done and I will never go back to a committee again. And I mean, and they're gun shy. I don't blame them. So if we have a finite bounds on, I think what you're proposing is really that. So I've warmed up to your thinking, and I think you've used it judiciously. And I mean, we look at the buskers ordinance that worked well. We look, I think about doing the Ruxton thing, the Ruxton corridor study, and I'm hopeful. We've also gone through several iterations where we'd hired contractors and we made them do public engagement. And one group, I remember being in here, they passed out little colored tiddlywinks. And one color meant you were for, I think, extremely for, and one color was maybe not so much. And you also had colored sticky notes. And we had this sort of chaotic approach, which I think led to more questions rather than resolved them. Bohannon Houston did something similar up in the Soda Springs Park several years ago with the West End. And those things seem to me to be a tremendous waste of time because, we don't, it's really kind of like create your wish list, write a letter to Santa Claus. And it doesn't really, I think, help the community focus on the reality of it. So I think what you're proposing is a good idea. And I would like to see that in these cases where we have contractors who are expected to do public engagement, that they would follow our plan and live by our rules and our sentiments. So thank you for doing this.
Could I just say something because
Actually, Nancy just meant,
Sorry.
Julie raised her hand and then we'll come back to you, Nancy. Julie. Nancy, go ahead, please.
I know that you've made disparaging remarks about the tiddlywinks before. However, that is a level of engagement. It's the second, it's a consult level of engagement. So that does have validity within this entire framework.
Okay, thank you. Julie?
I agree with your comments, Mayor, and the reason I'm very supportive of this proposal is that I think it will I think what we've done in the past is sometimes the public engagement works well and sometimes it really doesn't, and the public is angry as heck. I think this makes it clear from the get-go before we hire or even do an RFP for a consultant on any, or even have our own staff do their own public engagement. It really clarifies what is the goal here? Because if the public is invited to a meeting and it's clear to them that their input is not important, you're here to listen if you want to know what's going on, and we are not taking your input other than maybe to decide if we should paint the walls green or blue. They need to know that in advance so that they don't get all mad that their input was ignored or they didn't even have a chance to talk. So I think this really clarifies what kind of a consultant, what do we want the consultants to do or not do with the public? Is it informational or is it one of these exchange? So I think it's actually going to improve the impact of public engagement in Manitou. And I'm not a big fan of spending tons of money on all these consultants coming in and doing all this public engagement, but if they're going to do it, at least I think this is going to, step it up and make it much better. I'd like to give it a try.
Okay, thank you. You have other comments or Judith?
I also support this resolution. In reading the actual plan, I've been thinking about, community engagement meetings in the past. And I've noticed that, a lot of what it talks about in this plan is we don't involve the community at the right point in the process. Typically, we engage them later as I'm reading this and understanding it. And it helps to see where in the process the community actually does come in. And I can see, a couple of times in the past when that's been a problem, when people feel that they haven't been brought in early enough. And so I really felt good about that. And I think that it's certainly worth giving it a try. I support it. Thank you.
Thank you. Other comments? Nancy, you had want to address the stakeholder question, or was it Judith? Yeah. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead and make the motion, please.
Okay, I move to approve resolution number 1023, resolution adopting a public engagement plan for the city of Manitou Springs, with the only change being to amend the phrase stakeholder to tell me what it is again. Interested and affected parties.
Yes.
Yeah.
Or it's, my proposal was interested or affected parties, because just because someone is affected doesn't mean they're actually interested. But you would hope that you could engage them to come, and it's just the truth.
I'd like an example of someone who is affected but not interested, Alex.
Yeah, I think that a perfect example of that, and they're some of the hardest groups to reach, but would be the homeless population, or maybe maybe the word interested isn't the right word, but it's someone who would be affected but doesn't know. So maybe it's an indigenous tribe and we're doing something that could affect them, but they're just not aware of it. You're welcome.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Yeah.
Seconded by Councillor Chandler. Any further discussion? If not, let's vote.
Seven to zero in favor.
Okay, great. Thank you, Alex. Good job.
Thank you.
Okay, next item is urban county requalification for CDBG funding. Denise, are you going to handle that? Sorry, this is the CDBG grant
Yeah,
funding urban county requalification.
I thought that was after the URA, so I was not prepared. I apologize for that.
Actually, I'm sorry, and I should explain, I'm working off the printed version of the agenda, which is different than what's displayed in Civic Clerk. So I started off with this, so I'm using this one.
Okay. So yeah, I'll go ahead if that's okay, because we're going different order. Is that okay, Mayor? Or Mayor Jeff? So this is a pretty easy one. It just allows us to, we either have to say we don't want to be a part of it or we do want to be a part of it. It's that time of the grant cycle. This is the CDBG. We get grants almost every year for this. We do it from a regional. I sit on the board. As I said, I can't imagine a con not to be a part of this. It gives us money to do ADA and stormwater projects. So it is our one way that we get funding in that way. So if you have questions, I think the memo from El Paso County explains it very well, but I can definitely answer anything that you may have.
Any questions from council for Denise? Would you characterize this as kind of a housekeeping measure?
Yeah, I almost put it on consent item because it seems pretty, not lots of discussion, but yeah, it's a housekeeping measure. And I just need you to sign the letter that we have included. And I need to get it to them by, I can't remember the exact deadline, but it's coming up in the next couple of weeks.
Okay, great. Any further comments or questions?
Is a motion required?
Yes, a motion's required. Okay, we need to continue to renew an intergovernmental agreement and participate with El Paso County in the CDBG program. I'm sorry, I was reading. I thought I was going to let you, it looked like you wanted to make the motion. So, okay, I'll make the motion here. I move to have the city of Manitou Springs continue renewing our intergovernmental agreement and participate with El Paso County in the CDBG program. Is there a second?
Sure, second.
Okay, we have a second. Any further discussion? Okay, let's vote.
7-0 in favor.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so next comes the URA discussion. Okay, so question, Counselor, we all had a paper copy of memorandum from the Urban Renewal Authority at our workplaces here tonight. I don't know if you've had a chance to look it over. If you haven't, I think maybe we should take a brief recess and give people an opportunity to read it. Does that sound agreeable? Okay, so let's take, it's about 17 of 7. Would 7 o'clock be a good, is that enough time? Okay, 7 o'clock, we'll reconvene at 7 o'clock. Meantime, we can study this. Thank you. Hey, council, have you had a chance to look this over sufficiently? At least to get started, okay. All right, well, we have members of the ORA here and they had provided this paper for us, so I guess the appropriate thing to do is if you'd like to give us your thoughts, Jim and whoever, would you like to come forward? Debbie? So I guess if you kind of share your thoughts with us and then we'll maybe have some, I'm sure we'll have some questions for you. Okay, so we need your name and address.
Thank you. I'm Debbie Sagan. I live at 523 Crystal Hills Boulevard, Manitou Springs, Colorado.
Jim Reese. I live at 520 Silver Springs Circle, Colorado Springs.
Okay. Thank you. So you can see we just got this paper today and some of us hadn't had a chance to read it, but having gone through it, perhaps the simplest thing would be for you to walk through it for us and then go ahead and present on that, and then we'll hold questions until you get through the paper.
Thank you. Yes, I would like it was our intention because we didn't have the opportunity to send this to you until late this morning. It was my intention to read it into the record since there are people out in the world who haven't seen it and perhaps some in the audience as well. So this was a memo that we drafted and presented to our board at a special board meeting this morning. And it is in response to the agenda memo prepared by Mayor Graham. We wanted to provide additional information for the city council to consider in advance of this discussion tonight. Our board held a special meeting earlier today, and we voted to approve and forward this memo to you. Those in favor of sending this memo to you included me, Debbie Sagan, Ann Nichols, Barb Winter, Farley McDonough, Marcy Morrison, and Alan Gregory. Alan Delwich and John Maynard were unable to attend our special meeting and they did not vote. With respect to the MSURA budget for 2023, the 2023 budget presentation worksheet contained a figure in the estimated 2022 budget column that had not been updated to reflect the actual 2021 year-end balance. Every monthly financial statement that is prepared by an independent accounting firm has always reflected the accurate accounting of the revenues and expenditures for the previous month's funds and the actual fund balance. As of March 31st, 2023, the MSURA budget fund balance was $973,433. Expenditures of $85,846 were paid in April, which reduced the fund balance to $887,587. The authority has an existing agreement with Crane to provide $110,000 to fund the creation and installation of 2 sculptures and a tile mural on the Marcy Morrison Bridge. All of these art pieces are currently being fabricated. Additionally, a payment to the Holiday Inn Express will need to be made from the property tax increment received from the taxes that will be paid in 2023 based on the 2022 assessment. The working budget that was presented to City Council at the April 11th, 2023 work session reflected the elimination of all 2023 sales tax revenue generated within the urban renewal area boundary, as well as a corresponding reduction in capital expenditures. This revised working budget was based upon the MSURA board's assumption that sales tax would continue to be withheld from the MSURA by the City Council through the end of 2023. Therefore, the current projected 2023 year-end fund balance is $413,369. The background memo states that prior to 2022, sales tax collections passed from the city to the URA with little or no scrutiny. The MSURA has submitted an annual budget to the council every year since its inception in 2006. The budget clearly identifies projected sales and property tax revenues and expenditures for the year, and the MSURA board has presented its plan and progress to the City Council regularly. Expansion of the URA. The MSURA board is not opposed to expansion of the mission or boundaries of the URA. However, it is complicated. Boundary expansion can occur in one of two ways. The first is to amend the existing plan to add land area. Since this is considered a substantial modification under the state statute, the MSURA board would need to be expanded to include representatives from El Paso County, School District 14, as well as a representative for all of the special districts, which include the Library District and the Southeast Colorado Water Conservancy District that overlap the URA boundary. This is necessary to comply with the conditions in HB 15-1348, which is a newer provision of state statute enacted after the URA was formed. This type of boundary expansion would not change the current tax increment period that expires in 2031. With less than 8 years remaining for the current URA, new sales and property tax increment would be limited. The second option for boundary expansion would be to create a new urban renewal plan that encompasses the new area. A conditions study would be completed and a blight finding would be made, and a plan adopted by the City Council. This new plan could include the current urban renewal area if the existing plan were terminated. A new plan would require the expansion of the board and the setting up of a new sales and property tax base that would include all current tax revenue, even the increment in the existing URA. Any proposed tax increment funding for a new plan would also require tax sharing agreements with the other taxing entities, including El Paso County, School District 14, the Southeastern Colorado Water Conservancy District, and the Pikes Peak Library District. It is reasonable to assume that the taxing entities would require an estimate of the amount of property tax that could be generated by new development created by the new plan. Absent a plan of development, it simply is not possible to provide an accurate estimate. Development grants. The background memo summarizes the MSURA board's focus on redevelopment inaccurately in 3 important ways. First, the agreement with Paragon Realty for the redevelopment of the LaFun property consists of a $1.5 million acquisition loan secured by a deed of trust to be paid with future tax increment revenue. And it includes the right to foreclose if the developer does not fulfill its obligations to develop the property. This ensures that the property either develops in a timely way and generates tax revenues repaid to the MSURA up to the 1.5 million, or the MSURA can begin foreclosure proceedings to recover the property. The MSURA board did agree to provide Paragon Realty $600,000 to remediate environmental hazards and demolish the blighted motel building as it was vacant and constantly vandalized, resulting in several fires. Because the ultimate purpose of an urban renewal plan is to eliminate blight, it was critical to demolish the buildings as soon as practical. Paragon Realty has completed the remediation. Second, the Holiday Inn Express project required extensive excavation and demolition and unusual costs given the potential for flooding, all of which are eligible expenses for an urban renewal authority, not just infrastructure upgrades. The net result has been an increase in hotel nights, higher sales and property tax revenue, and more visitors spending money in restaurants and other businesses. This project has already outpaced initial projections for early year sales generation presented when the property owner requested MSURA assistance. Third, with only 8 years remaining to generate TIF, the tax increment financing, the MSURA board is redefining what redevelopment assistance means in practicality. The board is planning to provide grants to property owners for upgrades, including facade improvements, such as those made at Sheldon's Automotive and Adams Mountain Cafe. These grants would allow businesses to attract additional customers and result in more sales tax and increased property values. In informal discussions with owners, this is an attractive option for those wishing to enhance their business rather than considering full redevelopment. Possible actions. The first two possible actions listed in the memo are straightforward. Expanding the URA or dissolving the MSURA results in more complicated consequences. Expanding the URA or dissolving the MSURA would require the city to fund the MSURA's existing obligations. The biggest of these obligations is to the Holiday Inn Express. This development agreement stipulates that the sales tax increment and the property tax increment generated by the development be paid to the property owner to reimburse the costs of the eligible improvements. The maximum amount of this obligation is $2.527 million to be paid from the pledged revenues that may be generated by 2031. Once the county assessor determines the built-out value of the Holiday Inn Express property in 2023, later this year, the annual property tax amount can be determined. The original pro forma that was submitted to the MSURA in 2019 estimated the market value at build-out to be $5.2 million. That would result in approximately $130,000 in property tax increment above the tax base. If the city of Manitou Springs were to dissolve the MSURA, most of the property tax revenue would revert to El Paso County and School District 14, not to the city of Manitou Springs. Based on the current mill levy, the city would receive about $20,000, but would still be required to remit the total increment amount of $130,000. Over the remaining 8 years, approximately $753,500 in accrued property tax increment would be paid to the other taxing entities. In addition, the city also would be obligated to manage the Paragon Realty Development Agreement, including monitoring all provisions to ensure that development occurs within the required time, or that the property is foreclosed upon and the deed of trust is executed, which includes remitting $1.5 million to the city. Finally, the city would be required to close out any other contracts that MSURA has at the time of dissolution, which may include those with MSURA partner organizations and vendors. Conclusion. The MSURA board believes that implementing the current urban renewal plan area and plan continues to contribute to positive economic growth. Recent projects have reduced blighted conditions, improved infrastructure, added jobs, and increased tax revenue. Given the council's desire to examine a variety of economic development tools to help attract, retain, and grow healthy businesses in the community, the idea of dissolving the MSURA at this time appears self-defeating. Thank you. And we'd be happy to answer your questions.
Okay, thank you. Jim, did you want to say anything at this time or? Okay. Well, council, just gonna open up to questions. I think John.
Thank you, Debbie, for reading that. I have a question for you on page 2, paragraph 5, under development grants. In that last paragraph there, the last sentence, and I'll just read it. This ensures that the property either develops in a timely way and generates tax revenues repaid to the MSURA up to 1.5 million, or the MSURA can begin foreclosure proceedings to recover the property. I guess what I'd like you to do is maybe take that apart for me and tell me about this repaid to the MSURA first, okay? And then second off, if you can take a pause, I'd like to just clarify my question for the last part of that sentence.
Sure.
Thank you.
Happy to. So rather than having this development occur and then generate TIF that gets paid to the city and returned and then remitted to the property owner, we provided funds in advance to help with the purchase price. And the idea is that when the development occurs and starts to generate tax revenues, the funds would be repaid to the MSURA, assuming that it still exists, and we would then keep those funds instead of remitting them back to the property owner, right? So in other words, we we put money on the table to begin with the idea that it would be returned over time as the tax increment accrues back to the MSURA. That's the way that works.
Okay, so in reading the contract, the development contract with Paragon et al. I understand there's a 2-year lien period. Okay, and then at Paragon's, it looks like sole discretion with $25,000 put in your palm. Okay, there can be 3 additional extensions. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so basically they have 5 years if they went through that whole process, right? And elongated it to even begin construction, right?
That's correct.
And then, so prior to that, there's no recourse of foreclosure. In other words, they're in compliance with the agreement, right?
That's right.
Okay. And then they have to commence construction, okay, essentially in that elongated period of time, okay, by, shall we say, 4.99 years, okay? And then they have 2 years in which to finish the project.
Right.
Correct? Okay. So, and I hate to kind of paint the worst case scenario, but in the 8-year window, okay, that is in the remainder of the East Corridor urban renewal area, okay? This whole process of going on could take up 7 of those 8 years. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. And obviously we would all hope that it wouldn't take this amount of time, right?
Right.
Okay. So I guess I just wanted to, get some clarification on that particular piece there. So if we take that elongated period of time, okay, and there's 2 years of construction, in reality, there's only 1 year left for this repayment, right?
That's correct.
That keyword that I was looking for in that last sentence there, revenues repaid, right? It would
Yes.
only be 1 year
That's right.
of
But-
whatever would be occurring there.
And the idea for that is that the URA does not want a healthy fund balance at the end of 8 years. We want to be done with our work. And so what that timeline really represents is either we're done with our work and we have a 0 fund balance and all the tax funds go back to the taxing entities from that point forward, or we're not done with our work. We have recouped the 1.5 million that we lent to the developer because development has not occurred. And that money goes back to the city.
Okay, okay.
Yeah, Jim.
And just one
Mr.
other
Mayor.
thing to know.
I'm
that
sorry.
I'm sorry, at the end of the URA period in 2031, then all the sales tax, and again, I don't know for sure what the project's going to be, but it's looking better and better to be some type of retail project that'll generate sales tax. All that sales tax from that point forward goes to the city.
I understand that. Okay, so
Did you have a follow-on question?
yes,
Joe?
I do.
Okay.
One more, please. Then on page 3 of the memo, the 6th paragraph down, where it starts, if the city of Manitou Springs were to dissolve the MSURA, okay? I just want to know whether you would agree with my clarification words that I would like to read into the last sentence. The last sentence of that paragraph reads, over the remaining 8 years, approximately $753,500 in accrued property tax would need to be paid to the other taxing entities. Is that correct?
So this is a little complicated, but once the URA is dissolved, then it means all the property tax increment from that point forward only goes to the taxing entities, right? So the city would continue to receive approximately 20,000 a year. But El Paso County and all the others would receive the balance of roughly 130,000. So divide that out, 110,000 would be split out amongst the other entities. But you times that by 8 years, so it ends up being about 753. Does that make sense? So it's not like a lump sum that's paid at the end of the period. It's paid every year.
Okay, thank you very much.
Just, well, we'll come over kind of on the topic. If we could go back to the thing about the point about the $1.5 million that Paragon would be paying to the city. I'm not sure I understand quite how that would work. My understanding was that would be paid out of the sales tax that the property would collect. Is that correct?
Assuming that development is in place, right? The property is developed. Yes, the sales tax, rather than the developer getting the sales tax back that is generated, which is what happens in most URA development agreements. Instead, the sales tax would just come back to the URA or to the city. And hopefully remitted to the URA, and we would spend it on other projects or refund it to the taxing entities once the 8 years is up. However, if the property doesn't develop, because we were really worried about the timeline when this development agreement was put together, we put a deed of trust in place to protect that $1.5 million. Because if the developer is just going to sit on the land, that doesn't benefit anyone, doesn't benefit the community, doesn't benefit the URA. And so we wanted to make sure that money came back to the taxing entity. And that's why the deed of trust is in place.
Okay, but the only place for that $1.5 million to come from would be through sales tax on the property.
No.
Is that
No, if development did not occur, then the property would be sold, would be foreclosed on, and the $1.5 million would come back to the city and passed through to the URA if it were still in existence. You want to say something? Okay.
Well, go ahead, Debbie, and then we'll let Jim talk.
So there's two ways that the $1.5 million gets repaid. If development occurs, then it's sales and property tax, right? Then that is generated. The expectation at the moment is that the Paragon development could be upwards of $35 million. When you look at the Holiday Inn Express at 5.2 million, the Paragon property development is much, much larger.
Okay, thank you. Jim?
Actually, Debbie just made the comment that I was going to make, because I think you said it was all sales tax. And actually, in this case, it may be mostly property tax.
Okay. But you're seeing the figure in the land as collateral, I guess. Right.
Well,
that a
if you
fair statement?
look at the base of the property today, well, when the hotel was there, and then you build the $35 million improvement, you subtract off what the existing value was, and the rest of it is all increment. And so, at 78 mils, that's a fairly significant amount of money.
Okay, so you have the first deed of trust on the property. Now, it's my understanding that when a construction contract is started, the first lien will go to the contractor of the construction company, and the city will take a subordinated position. Is that true?
That's correct.
Okay, so the city moves back in line. What's to protect us? I mean, if the construction starts and it goes belly up, it looks to me like the construction company, the contractor, would basically have the opportunity to foreclose, and they would get whatever the property is worth, or the asset, and the city be out standing in line with our hands empty. And something similar to this happened probably 35 years ago at the Barker House. The city had we held about a $300,000 note. We had the first lien on it, and it got pushed back administratively. And when that project went downhill, the city we just stood there and lost $300,000. And I'm concerned that could happen here.
Possible. However, it would be almost impossible for the developer to get a construction loan without them being actually be able to be first in line. So we couldn't possibly hold up the development completely.
Okay, but we're still, the reality of the situation is the contractor would be able to start and we'd be standing out in the, just with our hands in our hat.
And I can't speculate because who knows how much value would have occurred and how much the contractor would have been owed. Would we be out all the money? I really couldn't speculate at this point.
Okay, Mr. Shada.
Just for the record, I guess I'd like to clarify, suddenly $35 million has shown up. It's not in this paper. Can somebody clarify where that number came from?
In order to understand how much possible increment could be generated from a property like the Paragon property, you have to understand what the fully developed value of the property would be. And the number that's been discussed with us so far is about a $35 million development.
And maybe this is getting to something that should be an executive session item. I don't think we'd expected to hear
No.
that. So,
I don't think so.
Okay.
I mean, it's the number that has been discussed with us, with our board. Yes.
okay, well, okay, go ahead then.
I think you're correct. I mean, it's, we don't have a development plan, so I can't tell you what that number is exactly.
Okay. Yeah, John.
So with regard to this $35 million, and I just did a quick word search in the development agreement version 4 that I have on my computer, I don't see that ever talked about in the development agreement, right?
Right. It wouldn't
So this is sort of in theory, kind of wishful thinking, basically based on the 2.2 acres of the property and its situation on Manitou Avenue. This is some appraised or some, how did you arrive at that number? I guess I'm just curious about, just educate me.
I'd be happy to. So what happened with the Paragon development is that because the city was interested in the property for parking, we, the URA, actually paid to have a study done by NES Consulting to look at 3 different potential development plans. And we were doing that because we wanted to see if that 2.2 acres could support parking, additional parking for a possible shuttle stop or parking, longer term parking lot to serve the downtown area of Manitou Springs, as well as a retail development. So those 3 development scenarios were created, and the Paragon development team at that time looked at those plans. The city looked at those plans. And so we had an idea of what a potential plan could look like. It's my understanding that the 35 million was the number that was created based on just looking at those plans in general, because that was a number that we were discussing. So I'm just giving it as an example. You shouldn't use it to base any decisions on in this environment, because Jim's right, we don't have an actual development plan. But just in terms of the magnitude of development that could occur on that property, with retail development and adequate parking, given the current land use code that we have, that would be one expectation of the value.
John. So that was, shall we say, the highest optimistic plan in that
We
scenario.
have no
right?
idea. We have no idea. It's just a number that was discussed at the time.
Right, but it was essentially, that was the most optimistic scenario of those 3, right?
No, it wasn't.
So was there a more optimistic one than 35 million?
I have no, 35 million is the only number that sticks in my brain.
I see. Okay, all right.
So
So
don't-
you said something that the city had access to this study. I've never seen that.
it was a series of drawings that were done when we were discussing potential plans for parking, for an agreement together between a developer and the city to have parking for the downtown, as well as a retail development on the LaFun property.
So this is an actual paper study that I could get access to and read?
I believe that you discussed it in executive session.
Yeah, I do remember an executive session. We were presented with some concept kinds of drawings, and it
Yes.
showed a building developed on the LaFawn property. It also showed a building and parking developed on the adjacent property, you know, beyond LaFawn, and that's, I believe, owned by Bob Wilcox. And I've not heard that Bob is interested in selling any of his property. So I
No.
know when I saw that rendering, I was going like, you know, why is the Wilcox property added in here? This is, I mean, it's frankly, to put it colloquially, Bob's plan is to die and leave the land to his kids. So he has to die in order for that property to become available. It's, I mean, that's, and he's said it pretty much that way. So I had some doubts about the veracity of that project or
and
that
the-
rendering.
That version was created to show that even with acquiring surrounding properties that were undeveloped, we couldn't generate enough parking that would benefit the city and include a retail development. And that was what we were trying to assess. Could that property hold enough parking to serve the city's needs and also include a retail development? And the answer was no. So that scenario sort of went out the window.
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead, John.
Okay, so I want to go over that evening. That particular evening, we were in executive session, and without betraying anything that I think would get me in trouble with our attorney. Okay. Some documents were handed out to us. Okay, we considered them, and then they were very quickly, mopped up. So I don't have them. So we got to see them for like literally 10 minutes. Okay, so if that's essentially what you're talking about here, these three scenarios. And that, I think we could say, was a discussion of a whole nother, scenario than the one that actually went down. Is that not correct? That evening in executive session?
I believe Jim was the only
I
one
don't-
here.
Yeah, I don't
We're-
believe I can answer that question.
Well, I think I saw some heads, Bob, up here, and could feel the energy that, yes, indeed, we were talking about something other that night than this particular agreement. Okay, so I just want to let
That's
you know,
correct.
I just
Yes.
want to let you know from our standpoint, we had 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes to look at that. It was for a proposal that Mr. Reeves brought us, that we did go ahead and show not interest in that
Yes.
particular evening. And then those documents were very quickly, just they vanished from us. Okay, so I just want to let you know that when you're talking about this $35 million and all these scenarios and whatnot, we're largely in the dark about that.
I'm sorry. I apologize. I have confused you when I do not intend to. All I'm trying to say is that the expectation that we have for development of this property is that the value of the property, once it's developed, will be far greater than the Holiday Inn Express. Therefore, our agreement is far greater than our agreement with the Holiday Inn Express because of the size of the property and the potential for retail development. It was only to show the magnitude of that. We have not been having discussions because we can't have discussions until we have a development plan presented to us about what the actual property value might look like. But just in describing in the conversations that we had while we were looking at those scenarios, that was about the level of development that we were talking about, just on the LaFun property itself. And those drawings are available. We talked about them in our public session. They're part of our record as a board. So because we drew those plans, right? We wanted to be able to answer the question for ourselves. What would it look like if there was some sort of shared development on that property that included parking?
So if I go out and look in the packets out on the city website, I can find that.
I can't answer that question. My
Okay.
assumption is yes.
Oh, or if it's not there, you could provide it, right?
Right. Yeah, I was
Okay,
gonna say,
thank
I
you.
don't know that
Okay.
we had it as part of any formal presentation to council at this point because none of them were given. They were studies. So, but I'm happy to share those with you.
So I guess I would just respectfully ask if you guys could find those, okay, and get those sent to Denise so that she could distribute those to us so that we don't have to go in a deep dive into all these packets to see this. I think that
Sure.
would be really helpful.
Sure.
Thank
Happy
you.
to.
Julie.
Can you give us a little more information on what the deed of trust says? What exactly will trigger our right to foreclosure? I mean, I understand the 5-year rule. So if they start building in 4 years and 362 days, and then within the 24 months thereafter, they build a tiny little shack that's selling water bottles or like that ice machine thing that they have on West Colorado Ave now. Would that satisfy their obligations? Can you give us some information on what they would need to do more precisely in order to avoid any kind of foreclosure? I mean, if they just generate 10 cents a year in sales tax, is that gets them off the hook? Or give us info on that if you could.
Our attorney, David Neville, is on the Zoom. He's appearing virtually, so I'd like to ask him to please answer that question because he's the one who developed the deed of trust or developed that agreement and is the most knowledgeable about how it would work.
Mr. Neville, can you hear us?
Good evening. Yes, I hear you.
Okay.
Uh,
Did you hear that last comment from Debbie?
I did. And so I think we had discussed at a prior council meeting how there is an expectation and a hope that that would not be possible because, of course, any plans would have to come through the city as well. And so looking at this from a partnership perspective, first off, the hope would be that that sort of minimalistic plan would not be something that would be put forth and approved through the process, which the URA does not have control over that process, but would certainly partner with the city on that. And so in the agreements themselves, it's really more focused on the timing, the time aspect. And I think the idea of that they would put something on there is that's just a shack is not realistic either because they're in it to make money as well. And I think what we've heard from them is that if they found that they were not able to do something that would allow them to actually make money on this, they would eventually sell the property. That is certainly on nobody's radar today, but they have a significant economic incentive to not do that what was suggested.
And can you say who, you mentioned something about, that would not be approved if they wanted to do just a tiny little thing. It would not be approved by whom?
I'm sorry, I'm referring to the city planning or your planning staff, your planning office.
You think the planning office has the right to refuse to let them build a little tiny little store on that huge piece of property?
Well, what is
Why would-
allowable under the code, under the zoning code, of course, they would approve it. But you'd have to look at this at the code at the time.
And so if we assume then that, just for the moment as a hypothetical then, because that may be a disputed factual matter, but if we assume for a minute that the city would be required to allow them to build a tiny little store that isn't terribly successful. You still haven't answered my question. How is the deed of trust worded? As long as they're generating a penny a year, then have they complied and the deed of trust would have to be released or what?
I think rather than looking at the deed of trust, we would be looking at back at their developer agreement.
Yeah, so what does
Yeah.
the developer agreement say about the we've been told, oh, don't worry, we have the right to foreclose. I'm like, okay, under what circumstances? We have no info at all. And are you not sure or
I'm sorry. I'm on my computer and I'm trying to flip back and forth. So if Jim, if you had that in front of you, I would allow you to provide details. Okay, so we would look. I'm sorry, my computer is failing me just a little bit here. Allow me to find that, and I will get back with you in 1 second.
yeah, no, thank you. And I misspoke. I shouldn't keep talking about the deed of trust. It's the agreement that you have with Paragon about under what circumstances can we, initiate action to get our money back.
That's correct.
And I'd be happy to do that research and get it back to you without spending the time right now doing it.
And so if
Julie,
we
did-
look at Schedule 4, Section 4.2 of
Okay.
the developer agreement, this is where I'm looking, where they're required to set forth a concept plan and a schedule of performance prior to submission of the city. And so at this point, this is where the authority gets to weigh in on their concept plan. And so this is where we look at, if they were to submit a concept plan that is not sufficient, we would be looking at, of course, the first step would be, okay, let's get a sufficient concept plan. But I think this is where we're looking at.
Is the city, can I ask you, is the city, in your opinion, entitled to deny a concept plan that complies with our land use code? I mean, we get to weigh in. What kind of word is that, weigh in? I don't care if we weigh in. I want to know legally, we don't have the right to reject their concept plan if it complies with our code, right?
The
And they can-
authority gets to weigh in. The
Like
city,
tubby or
the
small.
city. I'm sorry, I don't mean to step
Stop.
over you.
Mr. Neville, go ahead, please.
The authority will get to weigh in before any plans are submitted to the city. And so, no, I'm not suggesting that the city has the right to refuse a plan that's compliant with the code. I'm not suggesting that at all. But the authority has the right to review the plans before they're submitted to the city. So at this point, this is where the authority and the developer work together to come up with a concept plan that works for this property.
If you could get us a copy of that agreement, I'd like to read up on it. If that would be super helpful, if someone could get that to city council.
I believe I have a copy of the agreement here from the packet, ERA packet back in the middle of August, the end of August. So, Julie, did you have anything else right now? Okay, John.
So Mr. Neville, I'm curious, you used the word, and I do believe, I do have the agreement in front of me. And I think I do agree with you that word review the concept plan. Can you paint for me using Councilor Wolf's scenario? And the reason why I'm interested in it is this particular developer, by my calculations, only has about $1.3 million of skin in this game. Okay. The rest of it is essentially taxpayers' skin. Okay. In other words, removal, remediation of the property with the 600,000 and the $1.5 million note, correct? I mean, would you agree that that's in the ballpark, that that's about how much skin the developer has on the table?
I
The
don't know
money-
what else they might have spent outside of the acquisition costs. I know it was a lot, but I don't have a
Okay.
scale.
I-
And
I guess I'm going to assert that we're in the ballpark with that. So I guess what I want to get to, I don't want to belabor that point. I guess I do want to understand, since you used the word review, that the URA or its successor has the ability to review the concept plan. In your mind, if the concept plan came in, as Councilor Wolf said, which was essentially a, ice station that's at the corner of 21st and Colorado. Okay. First off, I do want to assert to you that the city, if it met all our setbacks, if it met all our landscaping requirements and whatnot, a fairly diminished use of 2.2 acres would be something that we would not be able to deny a building permit for. Is that not correct, City Attorney?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. I do think something fairly tiny could go there. Okay, I understand that we would hope that the energies of capitalism would come in with a $35 million plan. Okay, and it wouldn't be so. It wouldn't be a nuclear power station in which we would want to deny or something like that, according to our own code. But what would be the scenario, Mr. Neville, do you think that you would advise the URA that in reviewing the concept plan, what would be the criteria according to this development agreement that you could deny the concept plan? What would that be? Could you deny a concept plan of just a modest ice station like Councilor Wolf said?
well, the agreement allows the authority,
Give you the power to do that.
as written, the agreement says the authority has the right to review and comment on the concept plan. That's what it says, prior to submission of any plans to the city for approval. And those are the words. And so
So
at
using
this,
the scenario of Councilor Wolf's ice station, where essentially there's a modest building there that's producing ice for tourists to come through and fill their chests with, if that came before the URA, that doesn't sound like a $35 million plan. How, under what conditions could you say, no, that doesn't meet that doesn't meet the criteria of the concept plan? I'm looking at the agreement here, and it seems like to me, if as long as they put forth something that would go before regional building and would be approved, I don't see how you could turn it down.
it does not say approved. That's correct. And that was intentional, and that was negotiated. And Paragon was adamant that they are incentivized here to get something out of the ground as quickly as possible and as maximize the value as possible. And that, I mean, that's where the economic
Understand that.
incentives.
That's what I'm talking about, the machinery of essentially capitalism we would hope that would work. But I do want to underscore that it appears like to me in this agreement, okay, that the URA or any of its legal successors could not turn down a plan in which is possibly very modest in its proposal. As long as it was done in what I went through before this 7-year window of time. Thank you.
It is a possibility.
Mayor, can I say a few things here?
Yeah, go ahead, please, Jim.
I mean, theoretically, I guess what you're talking about could possibly happen. However, I mean, with the investment that they have made in this property and the work they're doing currently, it is really not practical to build something like that. More than likely, they would sell the property before that would occur. What you're supposing is it would not be profitable.
Okay, thank you.
I would also like to add one point that you brought up, that you say that the developer skin in the game was $600,000 with regard to the remediation. And I would suggest that it was well discussed that the remediation, the demolition of the LaFon Motel and the remediation of that site was a primary goal of the Urban Renewal Authority. And Paragon accomplished that, which the URA could have done directly. And so that was a partnership that is equally beneficial to the URA and to the city just by getting that accomplished. That's one of two major goals in this agreement. And, that's as much the city's, the URA's skin in the game as Paragon's.
Okay, thank you. I guess in response to that, I'm sure that Paragon's way smarter than me because my math says they've got about 34% of the money into the project, and it seems like they've got all the control. What did the agreement they put in 1.1 million? The URA matched it, put in I think with the $600,000 about 2.15 million. So the URA funded 2/3 of that project. So I guess that's a huge concern to me. And I mean, and with the agreement here, okay, let me read a couple things out of the agreement. This is on page 5 of the agreement. There's a paragraph sub B. The TIF advance lien will be evidenced by the deed of trust in the form of Exhibit C attached. The TIF advance lien will be subordinated to a construction loan at such time as the developer enters into a developer's financing in accordance with this agreement pursuant to a commercially reasonable subordination agreement, and so on. Developer and the authority will mutually agree to extend the TIF advance note in the lien period for up to 3 one-year extension periods by paying the authority $25,000 prior to commencement of each year of extension, which will be credited against the balance of the TIF advance loan. So it looks to me like they just sign a note for an initial $25,000 and add that onto the loan. The advance lien will be released and forgiven upon issuance of a certificate of occupancy or upon completion of construction for developer approved successor planning a similar development project. And it goes on to say, if development does not commence during the lien period, the net proceeds from the sale will be distributed as follows. And then there's basically a formula that goes through. And then a little bit farther down, it says, following release of the TIF advance lien, the TIF advance loan shall be repaid solely from TIF revenue, and the developer shall have no independent obligation to repay the TIF advance loan. So I guess either it's foreclosure or the URA would, or the city would get what would get once they start collecting sales tax. So just, well, and property tax, excuse me, and that's a good point. So to say that we have $1.5 million coming is, unless we're to foreclose, but I mean, if this goes into construction, then we lose tremendous leverage on that. And I'm not a lawyer, so that's my quick layman's interpretation. Mr. Parker, if I'm grievously off, I guess I'd ask you to straighten things out.
Yeah, I like to be careful about just jumping to conclusions based on an agreement that I haven't read for a while. And so, I think the subordination to the construction loan definitely puts the city in second place, but I want to read it more carefully before I give it.
I'm sorry, that was unfair. That was unfair. Okay.
I'm a little more cautious when I read these things, but I don't disagree that there's an issue with being in second place when construction starts, but.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Shada.
So I do want to, for the record, since I couldn't find it really quickly, Mr. Neville, but in Section 3 conditions precedents in the agreement, okay, it outlines that the developer's initial financial obligation under this agreement is to provide 1.1 million in equity for the acquisition of the property. Okay, so my comment that it was 1.3 million, okay, I believe the agreement specifies it was 1.1. I just want to clarify that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Okay, Natalie.
I'm struggling with this conversation because I don't have the agreement in front of me, and I prepared for a different conversation because we're just focusing on one paragraph of a letter that was given to us earlier today. And so I don't feel like I have the information to participate in the way that you two are participating, and including our lawyer and a lot of people in this room. And I'm a little confused as to how to move forward right now.
Yeah, I guess maybe we're coming up with more questions. So maybe the focus for tonight is we come up with our questions. Some would, I think, go to Mr. Parker. Maybe it might help if Mr. Neville was in the room. Maybe it should be an executive session, and maybe we need some financial information through our finance department. So I could see where we could maybe come up with some questions and figure out how to move forward in the future.
Mayor, may I make a
Yeah,
comment?
please. Okay. Judith and then Michelle.
Thank you, Natalie, for that conversation. I've been trying to have that very conversation for quite a while this evening. The agenda item states, discuss the mission of the future Manitou Springs Urban Renewal Authority. And while I think the Paragon property is an important part of that discussion, I know that you met this morning in a special meeting and you produced a memorandum that I didn't have a chance to look at because I had other things going on in my life today. And I really believe that it's unfair to in such an important discussion as we are having, the future of the URA, to hand us a 4-page paper, and then I had all sorts of questions too. I was writing down 35 million. I mean, where is this, and looking for it. And I do have more questions than answers. And I also feel woefully unprepared for this discussion, as Councillor Johnson articulated very well. Now I would like to go review contracts and look at site plans and all sorts of things. And I think that an executive session is the most appropriate place to do this, because I also think that we may have some questions for our city attorney that will need to be addressed before we can discuss the content of the purpose of this meeting.
Michelle.
Thank you. I do also want to thank Natalie for bringing it up, because I was looking for the Paragon agreement also. And then as I looked down at my email, I just received it from the mayor. So yes, I agree that if we could have this discussion in executive session, I'd feel more prepared.
Yeah, I just sent that to all the council.
Thank you.
And that's from the URA packet originally. Julie.
My question for Jeff Parker is whether getting these additional questions out on the table and getting better answers to them and being more prepared, is that really executive session material?
It really depends upon what you want to discuss in executive session. I mean, ultimately, you can go into executive session for legal advice. You can go into executive session for, strategy for negotiations. It might fall within one of those two, depending upon exactly what you want to be talking about. When I was looking at this agenda item, sort of saw the memo on the agenda, my concept of what was going to be discussed was, whether the URA is going to continue, what city council wants to do with the URA. And, I think there's a lot of factors in making that decision. I think digging into section by section into one URA agreement, well, I think it may be important in determining exactly what you're going to do in the future. I think there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and probably a lot of financial calculations to be done maybe by city staff in conjunction with the URA, getting good information from the URA, what their obligations are. So I guess if you're going to just look at this as a purely financial decision, let alone, are you happy with the URA project? Do you want the URA to continue to do things? The way I looked at this was sort of a simple formula. It's definitely more complicated than this, but what are the URA outstanding obligations? And, looking at the Paragon agreement and understanding that $1.5 million lien and how it works, what is that obligation, and what is the chance of the URA getting that back is probably part of the calculation into your decision about what the obligations are, and then how much money is the city going to end up saving or getting back at some point. I'd say, and then when you abolish a URA, you have to basically make adequate arrangements for all the URA's outstanding obligations and debt. And to me, I guess it would be, what are those obligations? How much money ultimately is the city saving if it abolishes the URA? And then how much is the city going to be assuming by making those adequate arrangements? And to me, it looks like you'd want to have a good financial calculation and say, here's Here's what we're going to end up having to take care of if we basically abolish the URA. Here's what we would have if we didn't abolish the URA. You know, one of the big factors I see, and then you're going to need some analysis of these contracts to understand exactly how that works, what certain risks are, et cetera. But one of the big issues that I think people haven't really talked about is how much property tax revenue is getting handed back to the taxing entities that the URA would otherwise be getting for the next 8 years that will no longer be available. And how much of that is the city going to have to be paying to basically fund some of these outstanding obligations? And that's something that I think is going to take a little time, probably first of all, for staff to understand so they can give you the numbers. And then you're going to want to have some probably legal analysis as to how these agreements actually operate. So I don't think it's a problem to go into executives. I'm doing a roundabout answer to your question, but I don't think it's a problem to go into executive session, provided that we're doing it for an appropriate grounds. But I think that maybe we need to have staff work with the URA to get you some information so you can actually ask the right questions and get the right financial figures so you can do some analysis.
Well, and if we did that, Jeff, if we go forward with that approach, then am I correct in assuming that we would not want the URA to be at this executive session meeting?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it
That would be
depends.
weird.
I mean, it depends upon what you're going to be talking about. I think probably it would be something the city council would want to get some answers from me on for legal advice. I know there's, issues with respect to the Holiday Inn. What's your obligation with the Holiday Inn? If you take it over, and there's some legal issues there, and then maybe some legal interpretation of this Paragon contract. I saw it months ago, but I haven't looked at it carefully. So that's why I was being hesitant to just answer questions in public. So I think it depends upon what you want to be discussing. If you wanted to work with the URA to discuss certain risks and strategy for dealing with some of these outstanding obligations, they could probably join you for part of it. If you're looking for legal advice just from me, you probably want to get that separate of the URA. So, yeah, you're welcome.
Thank you. Nancy.
Yeah, one thing that concerns me about not having the URA present is the fact that I think that part of the misunderstandings and in fact antagonism between the URA and the council that I've perceived, antagonism anyway, has been a result of two lawyers with differing opinions on things, on how things go down, and discussing things in executive session that we then can't discuss with each other. And I think that's led to a lot of confusion, misunderstandings, and distrust ultimately. So anything we can do with the URA present as well, I think we should strive to do.
Just a quick comment on that. I'm actually not even sure what the URA's attorney and I have provided differing opinions on. I'm not even aware of anything that we've differed on. If you're talking about me and the URA attorney.
Yeah, I would say the Holiday Inn Express, the repayment of the Holiday Inn Express, there's been some differences on.
Yeah, I like to make sure, that probably better discuss that in executive session. I'm just trying to be clear that I didn't realize that the two attorneys were causing the issue here. That's the first I've heard of it. So I want to make sure that I'm clear with the city council about that. Sometimes things are, that's what I'm here for. I'll take the blame, but no, I think that, one of my concerns, my suggestion really is to make sure that the URA staff are getting their information accurate so then they can present it to the city council and to the council members. I think some things are definitely reasonable to have in a public discussion. I just get a little concerned about talking about lawsuits, legal risks, et cetera, because we have been informed that there's the Holiday Inn is looking at investigating a lawsuit. I've had calls from their attorney. I don't want to be giving opinions in public about the risk of different approaches taken by the city or the URA. So I think that's important to do in executive session, but otherwise, something could certainly be discussed in public. So.
I think it'd be my preference to do it in public. We'd have to, I think, just avoid pitfalls of, the potential litigation relative to, say, Holiday Inn. And then if on the LaFawn property, if there is something that's being negotiated now, we'd have to keep that out of a public meeting. That would be appropriate, I think, for executive session, but it seems like we could do it and cover pretty good ground.
Yeah, and I guess, not to keep going on, but one of my thoughts was, as you see tonight, these are sort of complicated agreements and there's probably some risks and some things that aren't clear. And I think that for city council to get the good information, this may not, just having questions asked to the URA members here may not be as productive as understanding what city council wants to get answered and having staff work with the URA to get that to city council in an organized fashion. And I can look at the agreement, I can talk to their attorney and then bring something to you. So you're basically getting the answers you want rather than trying to get them on the fly. Because like I couldn't answer Mr. Shade's questions. I would get it wrong or it wouldn't be very accurate. I think that's probably part of the problem you're having here too.
No, granted it is. I mean, in looking through the draft, I mean, at one point it seemed to me like, would it be a good idea to extend the boundaries of the URA? And in a lot of ways, I think that would help benefit other parts of the town. But it just seems like this thing is so cumbersome that you can't make it work. If you try to change the boundaries, the genie's out of the box, it's a difficult thing. Maybe there's a skillful way of doing it, but it seems to me like this is so god awfully cumbersome that it's hopeless for
You mean the
a
urban renewal
length.
law itself, is that what you're?
Excuse me?
The urban renewal law itself is what you're referring to, like the way the urban renewal law functions?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it's a way, if we were to try to change the boundaries, I mean,
Yeah.
that seemed like a good idea. To me.
There's pros and cons to that too. House Bill 1348 in 2015, made things really difficult. When you're basically changing your urban renewal plans, changing boundaries, it definitely puts you in a different legislative scheme. Excuse me. Just getting over 5 weeks of being sick, so I'm losing my voice. But yeah, I mean, there's still potential to do productive things with the URA, depending on what you want to do.
Okay. Council, I guess the sense I have is that we'd like to get more information. We would direct staff and the city attorney to do that and possibly work with the URA to get that information so we have a clear idea of what all's at stake. I'd like to hear other opinions on that. Julie?
I think it might be helpful. That's a good idea, but I think it might be helpful if anyone on council has any specific questions, to go ahead and email those to Jeff so that he and Denise can figure out which answers will come from staff and which answers will come from the lawyers looking at the contract. Would that be helpful so that they know?
It seems to me that would be
what
helpful.
Questions to answer.
Okay, I see nods there. Mr. Shada?
I guess I'd like to reiterate what Nancy said. I also think that we ought to strive for a common understanding between council and the URA. And so it seems like to me, I'm definitely interested in our staff and our attorney's analysis, but I also want to make sure that we don't get into a situation where we're disputing facts or something like that between the two sides. You know what I mean? So I want to figure out some kind of process here that is transparent, and we don't end up with something where we get a report from you, and then later on, if we share that report with the URA, they're going, well, but wait a minute, that's not 35 million, it's 1.4 or whatever, you know what I mean? That
Absolutely.
we're not having, I think, so I would be interested in kind of a process in us kind of agreeing to that as much as possible, that it is, above board, so that there isn't any, engendering any animosity or any feelings that we have information that they don't have and vice versa.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think maybe if there's some thought out there that the URA attorney and I are saying different things, it may just be a communication issue, frankly, and it may just be communicating differently. And I can talk to Councilmember Fortune offline and figure exactly what the issue is that she's concerned about, and maybe clarify things for the city council afterwards. So.
Okay, let's keep going around the table. Nancy?
Yeah, I very much appreciate what Councilor Shada said. I think now's the time to look at partnering with the URA as opposed to a we-they relationship. And I think we've been reduced to that for a while. And I would really we've got a bunch of very dedicated volunteers on the URA board. And I think getting the synergy from that between council and the URA board would be very, very helpful. So yeah, I definitely want to, I like what Jeff said about doing the analysis. I wish we'd had that before we got into tonight. And to submit all our questions, I would just suggest that the questions go through Denise and then to Jeff, as opposed to directly to Jeff. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I appreciate you being here and I appreciate most of the members of the URA board being here. I think that it really is our goal to not only work with you, but make the best decision for Manitou that we could possibly make, working with you, not against you. So that said, I certainly need more information and appreciate getting, I'd like to know exactly what the financial commitment is going to be in each different scenario and the pros and cons, and then reviewing anything that both staff, the mayor, council, and city attorney think that we need to be refreshed on, that we need to be looking at. But I think that this is huge. It's a big deal and it's very complicated. And I appreciate this starting conversation tonight and going forward with a little bit more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Judith. Michelle?
Thank you so much for being here tonight. I too agree with Counselor Fortune about us being more of a partner together. I'm very uncomfortable about, us versus them. And I also agree with Counselor Fortune about us forwarding any questions to our city administrator that she can forward on to our attorney. Thank you.
Mayor Graham, may I say something? I'm sorry.
Well,
I came out of the
No,
blue.
that's okay. Yeah, go ahead. Shoot.
Thank you. I want to go back to the comment that Councilmember Chandler made a bit ago about getting this memo landing on at her place just before this meeting. That was disturbing to us as well. Mayor Graham was kind enough to share his memo with me last week, and I asked the question whether or not we'd be allowed to provide comment tonight, and he said he would invite our comments, even though that wasn't a requirement. You could just have held this discussion tonight. So we did draft this memo, and we did it through the weekend, frankly. And I asked for a special meeting because I wanted to make sure that I didn't just sit up here and represent my views, but that I represented the views of the whole URA board, or as many as we could gather together. We did this because this is complicated. Every single scenario that you're discussing is complicated. We have wanted to be working with you this entire time and to address your questions and help you to understand what it is that we're doing. Our job is fundamentally different than any other board or commission that you work with. And it is because we live under this complicated law, under this state statute. So it is complicated. And we just wanted to point that out to you and give you as many details as we could think of in the short time that we had to consider the mayor's options and present them to you tonight so that you did step back and ask thoughtfully what it is that you really want to do next. So whatever we can do to help facilitate that, we're there. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Debbie. Judith?
So just to make sure that you understand that I'm not saying that I don't appreciate that memorandum. I like any and all information I can get. I just wanted you to know that when I get that information, with 15 minutes to digest it and then have a responsible conversation in real time, I think is unfair to all of us in some ways, but the content I appreciate all the time and effort it took to put it together. And I certainly understand your rationale for bringing it to us. So just so you know, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I like the idea of getting the questions to Denise and having her filter those over so Mr. Parker can look at the ones that are applicable for legal consideration. And maybe we can get some advice as how to walk through this. And then if we could also get some clarifying financial information, I think that would make sense. We could make intelligent decisions. I will say, however, that I have questions about the future of the URA. You know, in what was a couple of weeks ago when you were here for the work session, and John Maynard, he made an interesting point. He says, if you walk up the URA, you'll see that we still have work to do. And I think I made the comment saying, John, if you walk beyond that, you'll see that there's a lot of work to be done too. You can walk up to the west end of Manitou Avenue where we finally got, the road is fixed and there are needs there, commercial needs. Why should the east end be given such favoritism at this point? It would naturally, it just seems to me like if we could stretch it out, that would be fine. There's in the memorandum you gave us tonight, I think there's an interesting line here, and they see a certain comment here that I think resonates with all of us. You're talking here about development grants. These grants would allow businesses to attract additional customers and result in more sales tax and increased property values. This is an attractive option for those wishing to enhance their business rather than considering full redevelopment. Well, okay, yeah. Can we spread the peanut butter a little thinner? I mean, spread it out so that it can go to, the West End, to downtown. I mean, we have that. URA, you get your sidewalks, you get the snow shoveled. People have to pay into the bid to get it done up here, or else they shovel their own walks. There's some real advantages of being in the URA, and I think it's unfair to, that's not a huge injustice maybe that you have to shovel your own sidewalk, but in the long term, I think the resources that have fallen, disproportionately to the URA, given the marijuana business being there, that should be distributed more judiciously throughout town. And I think we're at a point where we better address, redeveloping. We dodged the marijuana bullet. I don't know that that's going to happen again. So, I'm concerned about the whole economic vitality of the commercial district. So that's it. Thank you. Julie.
Well, that's exactly why I'd like to see an ordinance for us to look at for first reading so that we can at least have an intelligent discussion about it. I don't want to discuss the pros and the cons of the URA for the next, rest of the year. I'd like to be able to at least look at an ordinance so we can have a discussion about it if that's something you'd be interested in, Mayor.
Well, an ordinance, are you an ordinance to dissolve the URA? Is that what that's what you're asking for? Okay, let's see here. Okay, Nancy.
Yeah, I am not in favor of that because, well, for a bunch of reasons, but the primary reason is because we as a council agreed to do an arch to arch assessment for economic development, and to prematurely take a major economic driver, whether it's in one end of town or not, off the table before that assessment is done, I think would be foolhardy. And, why are we going down that road if we're making a decision before that assessment is accomplished?
Yeah, I mean, okay, so now we fresh information tonight. Potentially there's a $35 million project that's going to occupy the LaFawn. I guess I am a little skeptical if that's going to happen. I mean, and that's just, I think, notional. It doesn't, I mean, it's hard to say. Whenever I drive past there and I see that big empty lot, all I can think of is blowing dirt. I mean, it would be nice if something good happened there, but Denise.
Mayor, I wonder if it wouldn't be best if we brought this back in a work session with all this information, and I need a little bit of time to see what we need to gather and let you know a date. And then you give direction at that point of how you want to move from that point after you get the facts and we go back into a work session.
Okay, that's probably a good environment to do it in. Natalie.
I'm wondering too, if we could at least do an update on the DDA conversation as well, since I do feel like we are actively discussing what a gateway to gateway tool special district would look like. In addition to the fact that there's a lot of information that we still need.
Okay, who would be able to give us that information? Are you spun up enough on DDAs to?
I'd have that conversation with staff. I can't answer that.
Okay. However, I can see some utility in having a draft ordinance prepared for dissolving the URA. So I guess I'm sympathetic with Counselor Wolf on that. I don't know that there's much additional energy and interest in council to do that. I mean, let me just quickly go around the table. Michelle, would you want to draft dissolution ordinance at this time?
No, I'm
Okay.
opposed to that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Judith?
I support the city administrator's recommendation for a work session, and then coming out of that work session, if it looks like a ordinance to dissolve the URA is what the direction we're going in, and then we move forward at that point.
Okay, Nancy, I think we know how you feel.
Yeah, I'm not supportive of it until after we get the study on what makes sense for economic drivers within the city.
Okay, thank you, John.
I think I probably agree with Judith on this, that I would like to first have some scenarios, examined, especially by the city attorney, in terms of, I think we need to get on the same sheet of paper with this memorandum. And I think, since it was sent to the city at 12:02 PM today, I think Jeff needs to fully read this and digest all the components of it. And I do think it would be helpful to run it through a filter, of analysis from the standpoint of staff and the city attorney in terms of what would it look like if we needed to take that step. I think that would be a helpful thing. I don't think we ought to dodge that. I think we ought to look at that seriously. I agree with the mayor's original memo on that, and I think that needs to be fully fleshed out so we can put it to bed once and for all. Thank you.
Thank you. Natalie?
I also support the city administrator's recommendation.
Okay.
My only concern, I don't object necessarily to the proposal that we have a work session first, but from Denise's comments, it sounded like that may not happen for a very long time. If it's going to take a very long time for us to get this on a work session, do you all still want to just put it on hold? Because we have no idea. Is this coming back to us next year? Or, when?
Okay, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's that far out.
I know, I just want to make sure
It's-
that the decision to have a work session
Yeah.
soon doesn't mean that we're tabling this until 2024.
I don't think so, but I think maybe it's a little premature to figure out when we could do it, because there's some questions and some research that have to be done. If we could, I guess, let's all send our comments and questions to Denise and let her triage that and send off to Mr. Parker what belongs to him and off to Becca what belongs to her and so forth, and what belongs to the URA. And maybe we can huddle after that and see when we would likely have enough information to revisit this intelligently. So I know I didn't answer your question, but that's kind of how I think I see it unfolding. Council, if you're all okay with that, we'll do what we've talked about here. We'll send the information to Denise and we can of course forward it to the URA for comment and response. So that wouldn't, and this takes a little time, then you can have your lawyer look it over too and all that. So are we good with that? I don't think we need a motion for any of that. So we'll push on. So I guess we're done for tonight. Thank you. Okay, council. So we're basically at the end of the evening. So it's council correspondence. Anybody have anything? Judith?
Thank you, Mayor. I just wanted to get the temperature of council and you, Mayor, on whether there's a desire to have an executive session over the potential purchase of a piece of property that was brought up in the OSAC regular meeting on April 24th.
Yeah. And I think I had made a couple of phone calls with other parties who were, have an interest in this, and I haven't heard back from them. I know one of them, part of this potentially involves the school district, and I don't know if they've had a chance to talk about it. So no, they haven't. And in talking to one of the parties, he didn't seem to think it was very urgent. But if you have a sense that it's catching fire, maybe that's a little different than what I've heard
I wouldn't say catching fire, two things, and I don't even know if these are particularly relevant. OSAC did say in open session, this was not executive session, that they are willing to financially support the purchase of this property for open space / park. And also the chair of OSAC will be at some point, maybe in the near future, moving. So and I don't know, I don't, he has information that he might be, that it might be important to share with us. So,
Okay, thanks. And I,
but no, there's no fire.
okay, and I talked to the vice chair and he seems to be up to speed on it too. So we've got that to look forward to. Okay, thank you. That's a good point. Don't forget it, bring it up again here at some point in the future. We'll see where we're at. Anybody else? Julie?
Just real quick, I don't, perhaps this is just tough luck the way it's going to be. I don't know, but at the COG meeting that they had, their annual meeting, one of the residents up there complained that the sign indicating how many parking spots are available at Bar Trail didn't do any good, considering that it's at the entrance of the parking lot, because by then all these people are already stuck on Upper Ruxton in the big mess of making a U-turn and getting the heck out of there. So I don't know the logistics. There may be a reason, but it would make a lot more sense to have that sign be on Lower Ruxton or someplace where it could be positioned without being too offensive to people. Because it doesn't do much good up there, and the residents, you were there, Mayor, were concerned about all the congestion from the so-called looky lures or whatever they called, though the people just looking around to see what's going on.
Right. Yeah. And I remember that lady, Donna Solik, she'd contacted me, it was last summer, maybe the summer before. And we had, Roy had gone up there and put some signs up that basically said, well, I shouldn't say, 'cause as I recall, it said, go up, turn around and come back down. Cause you've tried to back around, try to use that intersection of Hydro and Ruxton, you're just going to create a mess. And I did get a call from her about a week after those signs went up and she says it's working really well. So, you know, it only works for so long, I guess, but yeah, I guess we need to revisit it and see, you know, and that there's certain people, it's just no amount of signage, I think helps. And I don't know, I don't mean to be pessimistic about it, but it's a vexing problem. Got it.
Well, if the whole idea is to tell cars, don't spend the next 25 minutes being stuck in traffic on Ruxton because the parking spots there are 0, then that would make a lot of sense if it was doable.
It would. And when we were talking about the Ruxton redo, at one point, there was some discussion about taking that intersection. Well, it's right where Ruxton and Winter Fork, you know, at the Iron Spring Chateau, about putting a little roundabout there and having a sign that says, if you don't have reservations for the COG or the incline and you don't live here, this turnaround's for you. Go home. And that's in project, an effort in progress. Anything else? Nancy?
Yeah, two things, excuse me. One, as I alluded to a couple of weeks ago, I did go to the pollinator, the day when Manitou was awarded or certified as the first certified pollinator district in the world, with Dr. Reading, and there were 2 entomologists there from Mongolia as well. Unfortunately, it was the day that it snowed on, so we took them on a tour of all of the pollinator gardens and the pollinator projects that have been going on. But it was kind of there got a lot of news play, so it was kind of an exciting thing, and I was glad I went. It was nice. Additionally, last week, I went to the El Paso County Board of Commissioners meeting that was held in this room. They're doing Commissioners on the Road or something. I can't remember what it's called, but they're going around to all the jurisdictions within their jurisdiction and holding their council meeting or their commissioner meetings. And we were the first ones. And there was a good representation of folks here, and I think it went very well. And I think that they really appreciated it as well. So thanks.
Great. Anything else? If not, we'll look to the city administrator for a report.
The only thing I wanted to mention is regarding work sessions, the last two right now, May 23rd and May 30th. May 23rd, the mayor is going to be out of town, and May 30th is the 5th. Works or the 5th Tuesday. And I know it's always nice to know if we're not going to have a meeting. So it gives you the opportunity to schedule accordingly. Right now, we don't have anything on the May 23rd date, but we might, and May 30th, we will not be having a meeting because it's the 5th work session, 5th Tuesday. We
Yeah,
would,
yeah, yeah.
but the mayor is out on the 23rd if you want to do it. And I don't know if we'll have everything ready, so we'll have to.
I'm going to be gone then too. No, I'm going to be gone. Yeah, sorry, but, well, if you wanted to have the work session, I'll try and catch up when I get back and do my homework. So if that's what council wants to do, I'll play catch up, but, yeah, I don't know that that's a good idea. I'm going to be in a place where I don't know if they have much internet connection, so. Yeah, but if council would like to do it without me, I wouldn't be hurt. My feelings would not be hurt.
I don't know if we'll have all the information about the URA at that time, if that's the topic that you wanted. And so we'll get back with you on we'll look and see what the questions are and the data analysis that we have to do, work with Jeff, and then come back with a date.
Okay, and we can probably give council, maybe you can give council a progress report, to say that it's going to take, several weeks or whatever, Jeff will blink his eyes and he'll know all the correct answers.
I can do this in a few minutes, no problem. But I mean, I think it's going to involve some financial calculations and analysis. It's not in my bailiwick, so it's going to not just be me, I think.
We get it. Okay, I think that covers everything we intended to do tonight. I'd look for a motion to adjourn.
Mayor, may I ask the city administrator one question?
Oh, sure, yeah, go ahead.
If we were not to meet on the 23rd or the 30th, what are we looking at for work sessions to discuss the URA? Are we going into June?
The next date would be June 13th, unless if council put another date in. So it's scheduled right now for June 13th would be the next work session.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn. Yeah.
Okay, we've got two there, so all in favor, say aye. Aye. We can do it electronically too. Okay, thanks, everybody.